Hello everyone. So the last one we're going to look at is to do with the prevention of illness. So we're now thinking about what are they trying to do to stop people getting ill. And many of these things, hopefully it'll start to tie together because you'll be really getting a sense of the period. So let's get started with the Middle Ages. So often, as an individual, think about balancing your four humours. So the individual might purge themselves to prevent themselves getting ill. So thinking, oh, I'm feeling a bit dodgy. They're going to purge themselves, maybe even bleed themselves to get a balanced diet. Sometimes they might even flagellate. They might hit themselves or whip themselves as a way of preventing death. And that's very much related to religious reasons. Sometimes they might have some herbs that smell nice maybe, and they'd use these to purify the air. They might ring bells, they might light a fire, and all of these things stop the miasma. They prevent the air from getting still and encourage healthy air, or get rid of bad airs or miasma. They'd also encourage things like cleaning your house. After all, having a healthy house, cleanliness is next to godliness. So that idea of household hygiene relates to that as well. And there's something called regimen santitas, which is where you wash your hands before a meal. So that sort of cleanliness, washing hands, keeping things hygienic was there in the Middle Ages. Public health was also included. By Edward II, he dredged the Thames, and the government also did things. So during the Black Death, they quarantined parts of London and parts of cities. They put a cross famously on people's doors, didn't they? Edward III also banned animals from slaughter in the streets of London. So they think most recently that the COVID pandemic may have been caused by animals being slaughtered in public places. They stopped that in Britain in 1369. So as you can see, these preventions are quite basic. They're about balancing the four humours. They're about using religion, praying, moving the air, and then there are some about cleanliness too. But they're quite basic. Now, during the Renaissance, they still use things to do with balancing the four humours, but they're becoming less popular. Bleeding, purging, they're still being used. The belief in prayer is still there. So just like in the medieval period, they still believed being free from sin would prevent you from getting ill. So working hard, being a good neighbour, loving others would prevent you getting ill. Now, personal hygiene did improve because there was slightly more access to hot water. But bear in mind, Elizabeth I famously said she bathed very often because she bathed twice a year. It still isn't a lot in terms of personal hygiene. There were also some new methods for purifying the air. People would spray perfume, only really if you were rich. People might wear plague masks to prevent breathing in miasma. People might smoke tobacco to prevent the build-up of bad smells. People were forced to clean their houses. They were forced to sweep the front step of their house to keep it clean. And dead bodies were buried 6 feet underground. This was taking place during the plague to prevent the spread of illness. And cats and dogs were killed during the Great Plague too. So these are things to prevent the spread of illness. So they're doing things like stopping people from getting ill by improving hygiene, by removing bad smells, and again, doing a little bit more. They often have to ask what's changed between the Middle Ages and the Renaissance. So making sure you've got a few examples, maybe at least 8, will be a really good way of saying this has changed, this has stayed the same. So maybe 4 changes, 4 things that have stayed the same. So in the industrial period, what we see, first of all, is a massively important one. So Lady Montagu from Turkey had been encouraging people to inoculate themselves. This involved getting someone who had a disease like smallpox and running a string through an infected pussy wound. That string would then be put next to someone who had an open cut, and the germs would be put into that person. This meant they got the disease and were able to hopefully recover from it. These were very dangerous though, because you could die. Edward Jenner though found that if you gave someone cowpox, it prevented them getting smallpox. And this means in 1803, Edward Jenner, created the first ever vaccine, the smallpox vaccine, which was later, in 1853, made compulsory by the government. So that's the first vaccine, and it could prevent smallpox. So that's so important, because now people are able to stop themselves getting ill by having a much weaker, much easier to defeat version of the illness than the fully fledged one. There were also some reports completed by Chadwick, Farr, and many other intelligent 19th century researchers. And they were tracking the cause of illness. Now think about John Snow. He's the same thing. He's tracking what causes cholera, and he's able to prevent it by removing the Broad Street pump. Now in 1848 there's the Great Stink in the Thames, and this leads the government to try to act to prevent a worsening of healthcare in England. And in 1867 and then later in the 1880s, more working class men gained the right to vote. Now, this is important. As more people gain the right to vote, it means the government has got to do something to improve the terrible conditions. And this leads to a number of acts. It leads to the sewers being created in 1865, which creates 13,000 miles of sewers by Bazalgette, and it leads to a number of public health acts that do things like provide clean water, proper drains, sewers, remove rubbish, improve lighting in the streets, improve the quality of housing. Now, all of those things like sewers, drains, toilets, clean water, paving, lighting, housing, prevent people from getting ill because they're living in much greater conditions. And in 1875, they also passed the Artisans' Dwelling Act. The Artisans' Dwelling Act, which removes dangerous houses called slums. And again, this helped prevent people getting ill because where they live is so much healthier. So in the second half of the 1800s, we see a lot of progress in the prevention of illness. And this is extended in the 1900s. We get a much greater access to free school meals in 1906. The government also introduced an old age pension. The government provide free milk for primary school children. And the government also put forward the Clean Air Acts of 1956 and 1968 to try to remove smog from London. The government also passed a national vaccination campaign against diphtheria and later against polio, MMR and HPV. So that's diphtheria, polio, MMR and HPV. The government have also been pushing to try to prevent people from starting to smoke. Cigarette adverts were banned in 1965, and advertising of cigarettes has been banned publicly since 1971, and they are currently talking about banning cigarettes for the sale of people who are under the age of 14 now. So by the time they get to 18, they'll never be able to smoke. The government have also passed the healthy lifestyle campaigns. Things like Change for Life, Stoptober, and Sober September. Lots of things. Dry January. Try to stop people from drinking, eating too much red meat, having unprotected sex, or other things that might cause illness. And finally, the government have recently passed the sugar tax, which has been trying to prevent people eating too much sugar in their diets, which can cause tooth decay and cause cancer. Finally, on the preventions one, we haven't got a picture for this one. But if you're struggling for examples, think of COVID-19. What did we do to prevent illnesses? We shut schools. We wore face masks. We were socially distanced. We were limited in the amount of time we were able to go outside. So COVID-19 is a great example for a modern one of how we prevented the spread of illness. I hope you found that really useful, guys. Nice short one. Well done.